Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Man, Nid, Gene with Mind and Heart podcast. And I am Ethan Nash. You might recognize me by my nasally sound to my voice. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. We're going to try something new this episode. And by we, I mean me, with the hope that other people listen to this. Anyways, I'm going to do a little bit of a book review, a book summary of a book I really like. I'm not really going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to pick sections from the book that really stood out to me, that I felt, demonstrated a powerful lesson, had something practical for us as managers and leaders, and just going to share that with you. And look, this is new. It's an experiment. If you like this, if it seems like a helpful and cool episode for you, consider letting me know. Leave us a comment on any of the podcast platforms, or just send us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com and let me know if this is cool and if you'd like for me to do kind of more of these book reviews, book highlights. And bonus points if you let me know maybe a book you would like for me to read, and then review on the podcast, so you don't have to. All of that said, the book that I want to talk a bit about today is actually one of my favorite books, and it is probably the book that I most often recommend to other managers, to other leaders. Honestly, I have gotten so much from this book. I think I've read it probably 3 or 4 times. And you know what? I think I've read it 3 or 4 times and there's 3 sections and I haven't even read the 3rd section. I just keep coming back to the first and the second one. So I'm not going to give you the full book review today, but I'm going to give you some parts of this. I find this book, again, it's called The Culture Code. The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. I just find it practical, tactical. He does a great job of kind of the journalism work involved with this and sharing stories, sharing narratives to help make the points, to help make them stick. I would highly recommend it. I tore through this book the first time, and there's so many elements of it that stood out to me as such a practical lesson, as well as areas that kind of stood out to me that reminded me of some of the practices and processes that we teach and workshop in the work that we do at Nash Consulting. So without further ado, let's just kind of jump into some of these highlights, some of these lessons that I took away from the Culture Code. All right, so the book kicks off with this great example that I actually like to use in many of my team building workshops that I facilitate. So it describes what they call the marshmallow challenge. And so basically you have teams put together, and the teams are given 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, 1 yard of transparent tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 standard size marshmallow. The rule is simple, or the game is simple. You have to build the tallest structure that you can without it collapsing. The marshmallow has to be at the top of the structure. Anyways, the point being is that the researchers for this experiment, they did dozens of trials, and they put together teams of MBA students, law students. I think they even had teams of CEOs, and they also had teams of, wait for it, kindergartners. Yes, kindergartners. And guess who, on average, won the competitions? Who had the tallest structures on average? On average, it was the kindergartners team. Okay, so they actually found that in dozens of trials, kindergartners built structures that averaged 26 inches tall, while business school students built structures that averaged less than 10 inches. All right, so they go on to describe why this is the case and what they observed. And what the researchers observed is that the teams of smarty pants adults, law students, MBA students, CEOs, when they worked on a team together to do this marshmallow challenge, what they were engaging in is what psychologists call status management, right? Which status management is really about figuring out where people fit into the larger picture and then managing their status around that. For example, they're thinking, all right, so who's in charge here? Is it okay to criticize somebody's ideas? Like, what are the rules here? What's my status in this group? How am I looking to the other people in this group? Am I respected, et cetera, et cetera? The kindergartners were not engaging in this type of status management for whatever reason. I'm not a child psychologist, but I think the idea is that as a kindergartner, you haven't quite developed that lens of the world, if you will. And so what they would observe of the kindergartner groups is they would kind of, huddle together and just have these short, quick bursts of energy, just kind of like, no, you go here. No, that won't work. Let me try this. Actually, no, my idea doesn't make sense, right? And so they had this sense of freedom and flow without thinking about how they fit into this group. And now I quote from the book. So, the actions of the kindergartners appear disorganized on the surface, but when you view them as a single entity, their behavior is efficient and effective. They are not competing for status. They stand shoulder to shoulder and work energetically together. They move quickly, spotting problems and offering help. They experiment, they take risks, and notice outcomes, which guides them toward effective solutions. The kindergartners succeed not because they are smarter, but because they work together in a smarter way. So I think one thing they're talking about here in this introduction is, I relate it to the concept of psychological safety, which they'll talk about psychological safety later on in the book, which I know sounds like kind of a touchy-feely term, but it's really it's a dynamic in the group. Psychological safety is a dynamic in a group of people where people feel free to speak up, speak out, take risks, disagree with each other without fear of being rejected, embarrassed, or punished. Now, that's the general quote of Amy Edmondson, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's in high psychologically safe groups, the focus is less on how am I doing in this group? Where do I fit in? How am I showing up to these people? What do they think of me? So it's less of a focus on oneself and more of a focus on the task at hand. That is exactly what they're describing amongst these kindergartners. So I translate this to, when you're a kindergartner, you generally already feel maybe a sense of psychological safety in a group. But as we get older and we learn about social dynamics and power structures, and we learn about our insecurities and fears or whatever that might be, psychological safety becomes less maybe natural. I don't know. I mean, this is my armchair psychology. But what I have observed is that you can absolutely take a group of people and build psychological safety. In a sense, you can turn that group of people into a group of kindergartners. And no, not the unsavory behaviors of kindergartners, but the type of behaviors in which people show up with that type of freedom, willingness to take risks, willingness to step back or step forward. And I think that's what they're talking about here. But the book is relating this to the idea of a group culture. And so I love this quote here. So, group culture is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. We sense its presence inside successful businesses, championship teams, and thriving families. And we sense when it's absent or toxic. Side note, I mean, I love that. They're talking about not just teams and organizations and companies, but like, we're talking about culture that shows up in our family lives, in many different walks of lives in which we have a group of people. We have a culture. Is it the culture that we want? Is the culture helping us or is it hurting us? That's, I think, the big question we have to explore. But there is a culture there. And we tend to sense intuitively, I think, when a culture seems healthy, productive, and powerful. Anyway, so back to the text. We can measure its impact on the bottom line. A strong culture increases net income 756% over 11 years, according to a Harvard study of more than 200 companies. Whoa. A strong culture increases net income 756% over 11 years. That's interesting. I'd be curious how they are kind of measuring or defining a strong culture. But, I mean, I think any of us that has worked in organizations for long enough, especially people doing the type of work that we do at Nash Consulting, this doesn't necessarily surprise me. I mean, we see all the time that a culture, a healthy culture, a strong culture, a supportive culture absolutely drives performance in many different areas. And I believe that a strong, healthy culture actually makes people's lives better, the people that work and are a part of that team, that culture. Okay? So back to the text. Yet the inner workings of culture remain mysterious. We all want strong cultures in our organizations, communities, and families. We all know that it works. We just don't know quite how it works. And so I think that's the premise for this book. It starts getting into Daniel Coyle's research and experience around some of the strongest, most powerful cultures on the planet, and we'll get into some of that. Okay, so this book is broken into 3 parts, and actually 3 different high-level skills. So skill number 1 is build safety. And again, what they're talking about there is psychological safety or trust. Let's put that all together. It's basically exploring how signals of connection generate bonds of belonging and identity. Skill number 2, share vulnerability, which is about, explains how habits of mutual risk drive trusting cooperation. And skill number 3 is establish purpose, which tells how narratives create shared goals and values. Okay, so anyways, the structure throughout the book, it's really cool. It goes into kind of narratives, examples, and then jumps to research. And then at the end of each chapter, each section, it gives some super practical, tactical things teams and organizations can do to help develop and generate these 3 core skills of successful cultures. So I'm going to share some of my key takeaways from skill number 1, which is about building safety. And I got to talk to you about this experiment that they describe in this book. It is so cool, so illuminating. All right. So basically there's this experiment being run by this guy named Will Phelps, and he studies organizational behavior at the University of New South Wales in Australia. Shout out to my Aussies out there. Basically Phelps found this, I guess he's kind of like an actor type of person. His name is Nick. And so Phelps brought in Nick to basically act in a way of 3 different negative stereotypes. So basically, he would put Nick into a room with a team with people that were working on something. They didn't know he was an actor, or what they call a Confederate in experimental terms. I'll just call him an actor. So, he would, in different settings, he would kind of play the role of these 3 different negative stereotypes. And so they called one the jerk, which he's kind of aggressive, kind of this defiant, deviant. The other one is the slacker. So basically He's a withholder of effort. And then the third was the downer, which is kind of a depressive, I would describe as kind of like Eeyore type. And here's the deal. Nick was really good at being bad. So here's what it says. In almost every group, his behavior reduced the quality of the group's performance by 30 to 40%. The quality of performance going down by 30 to 40%. That is significant. And the drop-off is consistent whether he played the jerk, the slacker, or the downer. And so basically they're describing, this experiment that people would come into the room, come into the meeting to work on something. They were energized. And by the end, there would be like 3 other people in the room with their like heads down on their desk, or like their arms folded, like clearly disengaging because of this guy's unsavory behavior. I thought an interesting part of this was when they were just talking about, when Nick would play the slacker role. And so basically, when he started doing those slacker type behaviors, the group picked up on that and almost started mirroring his behaviors. And so basically, like the group would quickly pick up on his vibe, and basically they would get done with the project super quickly, and they would all just kind of be okay with doing a half-assed job with it. And so, basically the group would be like, okay, well, if this is how this guy's going to behave, we're just going to do the same thing, was the idea. And so basically every single group that they ran this experiment with, all of their performance decreased because of this one guy. So quick side lesson here. There's a book, I can't remember the author, but he's a professor at some fancy university, but he wrote a book called The No Asshole Rule. I love it, based on some really good research. And basically the idea is that if you have one jerk on your team, it can kind of destroy that entire team's culture and performance. And it's just not worth it. Even if this person is a super high performer, they find that the net results of that team's performance is lower if they just didn't have that person on the team. So, I think as managers, as organizations, we got to consider that. Like, is it really worth having this people, even if he's a super high performer? And I think you have options. I think like either you decide this person is not going to work for this organization, or you are able to move that person into a role where they are fairly isolated and they can do their high performing stuff without affecting the people and culture around them. Okay, so anyways, every single group that they did this experiment with had negative results, except for one group. There was this outlier group. All right? And so basically they said that in this group, there was a guy that no matter what Nick was doing to try to disrupt the group, he was able to kind of turn it back around and turn it positive. And so, I quote here, so his negative moves aren't working like they had with the other groups because this guy could find a way to flip it and engage everyone and get people moving towards the goal. Okay, so this guy that was able to kind of save the group despite this person's bad behavior, they're calling him Jonathan. All right, and so basically they follow a pattern. So Nick behaves like a jerk, and then Jonathan reacts instantly with warmth, deflecting the negativity and making a potentially unstable situation feel solid and safe. Then Jonathan pivots and asks a simple question that draws the others out. And he listens intently and responds. Energy levels increase. People open up and share ideas, building chains of insight and cooperation that move the group swiftly and steadily towards a goal. So basically, Jonathan is finding ways that when the negative behavior surfaces from Nick, he finds ways to turn that around into something that's more warm, inviting. And so, quote here, basically Jonathan makes it safe and then turns to the other people and asks, hey, what do you think of this? Sometimes he even asks Nick questions like, how would you do this? Most of all, he radiates an idea that is something like, hey, this is all really comfortable and engaging, and I'm curious about what everybody else has to say. All right. I think this is so cool. How one person with the right skills or attributes can turn that group around. All right. I love this part. It says, so the second surprise is that Jonathan succeeds without taking any of the actions we normally associate with a strong leader. He doesn't take charge or tell anyone what to do. He doesn't strategize, motivate, or lay out a vision. He doesn't perform so much as create conditions for others to perform, constructing an environment whose key feature is crystal clear. We are solidly connected. Jonathan's group succeeds not because its members are smarter, but because they are safer. Translation. What Jonathan is doing here is creating psychological safety amongst the group, despite someone actively trying to destroy the psychological safety. And this is the paradox. One person can completely destroy the culture of a group, yet one person with the right skills and attributes can prevent that. Okay? And so then this chapter starts getting into like what are some of those specific attributes or behaviors that create safety, this type of safety in a group. Coyle is writing from his experience here. He says, when I visited these groups, I noticed a distinct pattern of interaction. The pattern was located not in the big things, but in little moments of social connection. These interactions were consistent whether the group was a military unit or a movie studio or an inner city school. And so Daniel Coyle made the list of the patterns that he saw amongst these really strong teams and groups. So I'm just going to give you the list because I think it's helpful. So the list is close physical proximity, often in circles. Profuse amounts of eye contact. Physical touch, right? We're talking about handshakes, fist bumps, hugs. Lots of short, energetic exchanges. There's no long speeches that people go on. High levels of mixing. Everyone talks to everyone. Few interruptions. Lots of questions. Intensive, active listening. Humor, laughter. Small, attentive courtesies. Thank yous. Opening doors. All right. So I know I'm biased here because this is the work I'm in, but I just got to draw the parallel to things that we do. I mean, I want to make a strong case for things like team building events, and I'm not talking about the type of team building events that we all dread and hate with trust falls and human pyramids. I'm talking about team building events that work to create these conditions that he's describing in this list and then build some skills together so we have a shared language around some of the skills that will help create safety and connection in our group. For example, close proximity, often in circles. Okay, let's get together and have some proximity with each other. It's about working with the group and kind of training them and encouraging them to listen, to ask questions. It's about even breaking down what are best practice listening skills we can all practice with each other, such as eye contact that was mentioned here, right? Asking questions, follow-ups, empathetic reflections. So I think that, part of what we are trying to do in our work is say, hey, we recognize some of the elements that create a successful, healthy culture, and let's make those elements explicit, and then let's build some skills around them, and then let's commit to everybody practicing those skills to the best of our ability. Right? What we're trying to do here, I think, is create chemistry. I know that word is overused, but that's the best word I can think of. By getting together, doing some team building exercises, right? Talking about our processes and systems that we can implement to be a stronger team, start talking about our norms, our common commitments. What we're doing here is building chemistry. And on top of that, let's learn about each other, right? Let's actually get into some somewhat deep conversations or have some fun together. And that actually builds connection and chemistry. And if you don't think that's an important element of a high-performing, successful team, I think you'd be wrong, my friends. And there's plenty of evidence and research, and I think just experience that demonstrates that. So the chapter goes on and it starts to talk about belonging cues, which is really what I think was being described in that list. So they say, so belonging cues are behaviors that create safe connection in groups. They include, among other things, proximity, eye contact, energy, mimicry, turn-taking, attention, body language, vocal pitch, consistency of emphasis, and whether everyone talks to everyone else in the group. Their function is to answer the ancient, ever-present question glowing in our brains. Are we safe? What's our future with these people? Are there dangers lurking? All right, and so he goes on and says that these belonging cues possess three basic qualities. Energy, meaning people invest in the exchange that is occurring. There's individualization, meaning they treat the person as unique and valued. And there's future orientation, meaning they signal the relationship will continue. And these cues add up to a message that can be described with a single phrase. You are safe. You're safe in this group. Look, we are social beings that evolved over millions of years, and one of the things that we are always scanning the environment for to make sure we're safe is, do I belong in this group? Because what would it mean hundreds of thousands of years ago if we got the sense that we didn't belong in a group, in our tribe? That could mean we would be ousted from the group. That could spell death. And our brains evolved this way. And now, in today's day and age, for most of us, actually being ousted from this group or not belonging might not actually mean death. But our software has not updated. So we're running this software in the background subconsciously. And so to have a successful group, we have to develop a culture where we feel a level of safety within that group. Okay, so then he gets into kind of an interview he had with Amy Edmondson, who I mentioned earlier. She's kind of the guru around psychological safety. She's at Harvard University, but her quote is, "So as humans, we are very good at reading cues. We are incredibly attentive to the interpersonal phenomena. We have a place in our brain that's always worried about what people think of us, especially higher ups." Okay, so we're talking about especially people that have a power differential. I'll link to an episode about the power differential. That's a key element here. Anyways, as far as our brain is concerned, if our social system rejects us, we could die. This is exactly what I was saying earlier, folks. This is the software that we're running in the background, and it shows up when we are in a group of people, whether in work, in our community, in our families, whatever. Okay? So she goes on. So the key to creating psychological safety is to recognize how deeply obsessed our unconscious brains are with it. A mere hint of belonging is not enough. One or two signals are not enough. We are built to require lots of signaling over and over. This is why a sense of belonging is easy to destroy and hard to build. The dynamic evokes the words of Texas politician Sam Rayburn. Any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a good carpenter to build one. So, okay, I'm going to keep reading because I love this part, but it's useful to look at the bad apple experiment in this light. So that's where they brought in Nick to act as a jerk or slacker or whatever. So Nick was able to disrupt the chemistry of the groups merely by sending a few cues of non-belonging. His behavior was a powerful signal to the group. We are not safe, which immediately caused the group's performance to fall apart. Jonathan, on the other hand, delivered a steady pulse of subtle behaviors that signaled safety. He connected individually. He listened intently and signaled the importance of the relationship. He was a wellspring of belonging cues, and the group responded accordingly. So let's think about this in the context of us as managers, as leaders. And let's look in the mirror. Do we understand belonging cues, what those look like and what those sound like? For many of us, or some of us at least, it might come kind of naturally, right? We kind of naturally know how to signal those cues without really thinking about it. For others of us, myself included, I might naturally do some of them, but some of the other key belonging cues is an actual skill that I need to develop. For example, I think I'm naturally kind of a curious person and tend to ask a lot of questions, which helps signal belonging, that I care, I'm interested in what you're saying. But I think it wasn't my natural default to also be like a really excellent listener in the sense of signaling I'm understanding, maybe not interrupting, and that was something I had to work on. Okay, so let's just remember that once again, these are skills and behaviors that we can develop once we recognize the skills that will create these cultures of belonging, connection, and psychological safety. All right, so I'll give you another example that came from the book. So, a couple researchers named Pentland and Kurhan, I guess they use social metrics to analyze 46 simulated negotiations between pairs of business students who played the role of employee and boss. So basically, the task was to negotiate the terms for a new position, including salary, company car, vacation, health benefits. And so the two researchers found that the first 5 minutes of the sociometric data strongly predicted the outcomes of the negotiation. In other words, the belonging cues sent in the initial moments of the interaction matter more than anything they said. I'm going to repeat that because this is important. In other words, the belonging cues sent in the initial moments of the interaction mattered more than anything they said. All right. This is why I am a big believer to make time at the beginning of meetings, whether group meetings, one-on-one meetings, for a little bit of the quote-unquote dreaded small talk. But I'm talking about, like, look, it's worth putting 5 minutes on the agenda to do a little check-in with the group, to do a little bit of a round table, what's going on with you, to do a little team building exercise, to just chat and connect for a little bit that's not related to the work you're about to get into. There's a reason crazy consultants like me encourage that stuff. It's not just because we think it's nice. I mean, it is. But we're talking about connection. And connection is extremely powerful. So, as a manager, as a leader, I mean, this is something I think you should consider. If you have an aversion to this type of small talk or icebreakers, I encourage you to maybe try to get over that. Because connection matters. Period. All right, so overall, they found that these researchers' studies show that team performance is driven by 5 measurable factors. 1, everyone in the group talks and listens in roughly equal measure, keeping contributions short. All right, so sometimes when I'm working with teams, I suggest something like, let's do some airtime math here, right? If I notice that there are people that are taking up most of the airtime or more than their fair share, I say, let's do some airtime math. All right, so there's 4 of you in this group. How much airtime is yours? Okay, 25%. Right, so, I mean, this is important. Everybody in the group talks and listens in roughly equal measure. It also means that we should be aware of not going on these long speeches, right? We're kind of shorter bursts, leaving room for other people to jump in. So something to look out for. The second one is members maintain high levels of eye contact and their conversations and gestures are energetic. The third one is members communicate directly with one another, not just with the team leader. Look, I see this quite often with groups, and it's a sign to me that we need to build some more connection in the group. I am facilitating, for example, and there's a conversation that starts to go on amongst the members, but then when people are, it's their part to contribute to that conversation, they're looking at me. And I'll just subtly say something like, hey, talk to your group. right? Speak to them. I also see this if I'm kind of observing teams with their leaders. Are they just looking at the leader when they talk? And so I think as leaders, we can tactfully kind of indicate, like, hey, turn to the group, talk to the group, not just me. Again, tactful is the key phrase there. All right, so the other one here is members carry on back channel or side conversations within the team. One of my pet peeves, if you will, is when there's kind of a group meeting going on and we're getting creative and we're talking about things, and then, somebody, often the leader, starts to speak up, and there's a couple sidebars going on, and the leader goes, hey, everybody, can I get your attention, please? Okay, look, there's a time and a place for making sure you get everybody's attention, but I think we can recognize that those sidebars, those side conversations are belonging cues and belonging connection that's happening in the moment. They're a sign of interest, they're a sign of engagement, they're a sign of connection. So I think for some of us, me included, this was the lesson I had to learn, is to be a bit more tolerant about those sidebar, side conversations when you sense that they're actually productive to what's going on here. The fifth one here is members periodically break, go exploring outside the team, and bring information back to share with others. So as leaders or as facilitators, I think one, maybe tactical thing that we can keep on our radar when we're facilitating is make lots of time for small group conversations in that meeting, or kind of paired conversations, or turn and talk, right? Get people talking in smaller groups, get people interacting with different people in different ways. I think that can really help build connection and belonging amongst a group. And so what they're implying in this section of the book is, these behaviors are the catalyst to creating what they call collective intelligence. And one way to think about collective intelligence, and this comes from the book, is the idea that just hearing something said rarely results in a change in behavior. They're just words. When we see people in our peer group play with an idea that we put out there, that's when our behavior changes. And that's how collective intelligence is created. One thing that I like to think a lot about, with our team at Nash Consulting, or the groups that I'm consulting with, is this idea of inquiry versus advocacy. And it's the latter, the advocacy, the former, the inquiry, that it helps create that level of group intelligence. So what I mean by this is, you can observe a group. I've done a lot of observing groups, and I start to kind of keep tally of how often people are just kind of advocating for their idea, kind of explaining, showing, telling, versus how often are people inquiring about somebody else's idea, asking questions. And what we find is that groups that have a heavy leaning towards inquiry versus advocacy tend to be more cohesive, tend to get better at making decisions together. And that's how group intelligence, collective intelligence is created. All right? And so again, this is something that we can help promote and develop amongst our teams. And that starts with us as leaders in that group. Are we careful that we're not just doing the advocacy, explaining, telling people about our idea, defending our idea? Or if somebody pushes back, are we getting curious about that? Hey, tell me more about that. Hey, what do you mean? How would this look differently? Right? It's not the kind of like challenge type of questions. It's the type of inquiry that's like, I really want to understand. This is interesting. It's a belonging cue, folks. It's a belonging cue. All right, we're like just through the first chapter, and we're already quite a ways into the episode. So we're certainly not going to get through this whole book, but I hope I'm giving you some really cool segments for you to think about, and hopefully some things to act on and implement here. Okay, so in the next chapter, they kind of reiterate some of the lessons we learned from this first chapter. They're talking about Google and some NBA teams and some other stuff, and they're, again, pointing to the fact that, hey, everybody in the group talks and listens in roughly equal measure. So again, looking at our airtime, watching our airtime. They're talking about members facing one another. Their conversations and gestures are energetic. Okay. And just remember, I mean, coming back to, an earlier part from the last chapter, you can actually have a not so energetic group, but you have somebody in that group that is skilled at showing connection and energy that can turn a whole group around. So I'm going to read you kind of a long passage here because I think it's really important. It's really interesting research that I think has a lot of practical implications. All right, so here it goes. Let's take a closer look at how belonging cues function in your brain. Say I give you a moderately tricky puzzle where the goal is to arrange colors and shapes on a map. You can work on it as long as you like. After explaining the task, I leave you to your work. 2 minutes later, I pop back in and hand you a slip of paper with a handwritten note. I tell you that the note is from a fellow participant named Steve, whom you've never met. Steve did the puzzle earlier and wanted to share a tip with you, I say. You read the tip and get back to work. And that's when everything changes. Without trying, you start working harder on the puzzle. Areas deep in your brain begin to light up. You are more motivated, twice as much. You work more than 50% longer with significantly more energy and enjoyment. What's more, the glow endures. 2 weeks later, you are inclined to take on similar challenges. In essence, that slip of paper changes you into a smarter, more attuned version of yourself. Wow, look, imagine that, okay? So somebody helps you, and you experience somebody just out of the goodness of their heart assisting you, helping you, and that makes you into a better, smarter version of yourself. I mean, think about that from a team dynamic standpoint, right? Do we have a team? Do we have a culture that is willing to do those type of things, to help each other out, to get each other's back, to just offer help, even when it is to no immediate benefit to me? I think this is really powerful stuff. All right, I'll continue. So here's the thing. Steve's tip was not actually useful. It contained zero relevant information. All the changes in motivation and behavior you experienced afterward were due to the signal that you were connected to someone who cared about you. Whoa. I mean, I think that's cool. I don't know about you. I think that's super cool. I mean, like, I'm actually getting kind of fired up about this, just rereading this. I mean, this is so cool. This is exciting to me. All right, I'm just going to keep going because there's another cool experiment here I got to share with you. Okay, so we get another example of how belonging cues work in an experiment that might be called, Would You Give a Stranger Your Phone? It consists of 2 scenarios and a question. Scenario 1, you are standing in the rain at a train station. A stranger approaches and politely says, Can I borrow your cell phone? Scenario 2, you are standing in the rain at a train station. A stranger approaches and politely says, I'm so sorry about the rain. Hey, can I borrow your cell phone? Question. To which stranger are you more likely to respond? All right, think about that for a second. I think it might be pretty obvious. But here's what it says. At first glance, there's not a lot of difference between the 2 scenarios. All right. And it goes on to then say, it says, hey, besides, the more important factor here would seem to have less to do with them than with you, namely your natural disposition towards handing a valuable possession to a stranger. All in all, a reasonable person might predict that the 2 approaches would yield roughly equal response rates. However, a reasonable person would be wrong. So when Allison Wood Brooks of Harvard Business School, I love Allison Wood Brooks. She does such good work, such good research. Anyways, when Brooks of Harvard Business School performed the experiment, she discovered that the second scenario caused the response rate to jump a whopping 422%. Those 6 words, I'm so sorry about the rain, transformed people's behavior. They functioned exactly the way Steve's tip did in the puzzle experiment. They were an unmistakable signal, this is a safe place to connect. Guys, this is cool. Like, oh my goodness, like my eyes like kind of twitching right now because I get excited about this stuff. I'm a nerd, but like We talk about this all the time when we work with groups. It's like a culture where people are just kind to each other, nice to each other, polite, say please, say thank you, right? Ask about how your day's going, right? These things that on the surface seem like, okay, well, those are just kind of like being polite. So what? I mean, they're a big deal. This is what creates connection. Simple words, simple things like, hey, I'm sorry that you're having a tough day, can allow you and that person to interact more collaboratively, to cooperate at a higher level. So even if you don't care about being nice and polite to people, which I hope you would, like even if you were only solely focused on performance outcomes, you would still want to practice these behaviors and these kind ways of interacting with each other. Again, I think this is cool. I keep saying that, but look it, I'm into it. I am into it. Okay, so I really like this add-on. So basically, they're kind of quoting the researcher here, but so a small signal can have a huge effect, right? Those small signals. Again, the example was, "Hey, I'm so sorry about the rain." That's a small signal. So those can have huge effects. But the deeper thing to realize is that you can't just give a cue once. This is all about establishing relationships, conveying the fact that I'm interested in you, and that all the work we do together is in the context of that relationship. So it's a narrative, and you have to keep it going. It's not unlike a romantic relationship. How often do you tell your partner that you love them? It may be true, but it's still important to let them know over and over. I mean, that resonated with me. It's, this whole idea of like, honey, I told you I loved you when I married you. I'll let you know if I change my mind. No, we have to constantly and consistently give these cues. It's about creating a culture of giving these belonging cues. And so I'll continue. So this idea that belonging needs to be continually refreshed and reinforced is worth dwelling on for a moment. If our brains processed safety logically, we would not need this steady reminding. But our brains did not emerge from millions of years of natural selection because they process safety logically. They emerged because they are obsessively on the lookout for danger. Folks, that's how we survived as a human being. That's why you're here, right? All your fearless ancestors were eaten by saber-toothed tigers. So we're always on the lookout for danger, specifically, especially in this day and age, social danger. And we have to continually give those belonging cues. All right. Okay, I got to read this part just because, this is like gold. So, science has recently discovered, however, that the amygdala isn't just about responding to danger. It also plays a vital role in building social connection. It works like this. When you receive a belonging cue, the amygdala switches roles and starts to use its immense unconscious neuro horsepower to build and sustain your social bonds. It tracks members of your group, tunes into their interactions, and sets the stage for meaningful engagement. In a heartbeat, it transforms from a growling guard dog into an energetic guide dog with a single-minded goal: to make sure you stay tightly connected with your people. I like that. I don't even have any more comments. I thought that was insightful. All right, I'm going to jump ahead to a couple chapters later. It's chapter 4 called "How to Build Belonging." I think this is probably one of my favorite chapters, probably outside of chapter number 1. But we're still talking about building safety. This is the chapter they get into one of my favorite basketball coaches of all time, Greg Popovich. If you don't know Greg Popovich, go Google interviews with Greg Popovich. He is the most hilarious coach to interview. He is just like 3-word responses. I can't even describe it. It's funny. And I think this is relevant to this chapter because when you see interviews with him, he looks like a super kind of stoic, gruff, kind of pissed off kind of guy. And yet it is well known in the NBA and across sports that he builds some of the strongest cultures and has some of the most respect based relationships with the players and staff that he's had on his team. He is widely loved by every player that has been on his team, which has been the San Antonio Spurs. So I'm going to read some parts from this chapter focusing in on Greg Popovich, and then I will kind of close out this episode by giving you some of the practical steps and takeaways that this section closes with in the book. All right, so it talks about just kind of how successful this franchise has been, the San Antonio Spurs, all the success they've had, yada, yada, yada. And then they talk about, they start getting into how Greg Popovich connects with his players. So when Popovich wants to connect with a player, he moves in tight enough that their noses nearly touch. I wouldn't recommend this as a leader or manager per se. I mean, this is kind of a sports specific context, even in sports, maybe a little weird. It works for him. Not a recommendation, so take it as it is. But anyways, when he wants to connect with a player, he moves in tight enough that their noses nearly touch. It's almost like a challenge, an intimacy contest. As warm-ups continue, he keeps roving, connecting. A former player walks up, and Popovich beams, his face lighting up with a toothy grin. They talk for 5 minutes, catching up on life, kids, and teammates. "Love you, brother," Popovich says as they part. A lot of coaches can yell or be nice, but what Pop does is different, says one of his assistant coaches. He delivers two things over and over. He tells you the truth with no bullshit, and then he'll love you to death. This, folks, I just got to take a little bit of a side tour on this. I mean, this is one of the misconceptions that I see out there with psychological safety when we talk about this idea of psychological safety. People think it's about just being nice. Like, we just got to be super nice, and we got to protect people from criticism. It's about not, protecting people from things that might make them uncomfortable. It's actually almost the opposite of that, right? So I love how they describe this. Again, he tells you the truth with no bullshit, and then he'll love you to death. Like, these two things can go together and create an extremely high-performing organization where we have a culture where we can give feedback openly, bluntly. We are okay engaging in conflict and debate with each other over ideas because we care about what's going on here, right? We're willing to push back, put ideas out there that people might not like, and we can even be pissed off at each other for a little bit, but yet can we still respect each other? Yes, we can. Can we even still love each other? Obviously not in the romantic sense, but can we love each other as human beings that work closely with each other? Right? Can we be there for each other? Again, treat each other with respect. Again, be able to have a conflict and a debate and then walk away and go grab a beer together. We can hold those two things together at the same time. And I think that's what they're describing here with Popovich. He can actually get away with some of his tantrums that you can also see videos on the internet, because he shows such love and connection and respect for those on his team. All right, so I got to read this part. So they're kind of describing a scene where the Spurs kind of got their butts kicked in a game. And so they're talking about, okay, so the Spurs had gathered in the video room to review the Oklahoma City game. They just played Oklahoma City. They had sat down with trepidation, expecting Popovich to detail the sins of the previous night, to show them what they did wrong and what they could do better. But when Popovich clicked on the video, the screen flickered with a CNN documentary on the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. The team watched in silence as the story unfolded. Martin Luther King Jr., Lyndon Johnson, and the Selma marches. When it was over, Popovich asked questions. He always asked questions. He always asked questions, and those questions are always the same. Personal, direct, focus on the big picture. What did you think of it? What would you have done in that situations? So they talk about the team kind of, here they are sitting in the room thinking they're reviewing game film, and they're talking about something bigger than basketball, bigger than their jobs. and they have a really lively conversation about that. Then it says, hey, they were not surprised because on the Spurs, this kind of thing happens all the time. Popovich would create similar conversations on the war in Syria or the change of government in Argentina, gay marriage, institutional racism, terrorism. It doesn't really matter as long as it delivers the message he wants it to deliver. There are bigger things than basketball to which we are all connected. I mean, I don't really know how to expand on this too much because I think it puts it so clearly here, but I just got to say that the idea that work should only be about work, I think in many cases, not all of them, but in many cases, that I think that idea is misguided. I think most of us care about things much more than our work and our job, and to bring some of that into the conversation with us, that absolutely builds a sense of connection. It starts to pull out shared values amongst people, which builds cooperation. And so I think that's a great example of this. Okay, so he kind of goes on and starts talking about something else, which I kind of touched on earlier with the kind of the dichotomy of psychological safety. But so they say one misconception about highly successful cultures is they are happy, lighthearted places. This is mostly not the case. They are energized and engaged, but at their core, their members are oriented less around achieving happiness than around solving hard problems together. This task involves many moments of high candor feedback, uncomfortable truth telling, when they confront the gap between where the group is and where it ought to be. Again, we have to hold two things out there: that we want to care about each other, we want to connect, we want to send belonging cues, and we can do that, and that is not mutually exclusive from, again, what they're calling here high candor feedback, uncomfortable truth telling, conflict, debate, even being upset with each other for periods of times, even stepping over the line a little bit in a conversation with somebody, and then having to walk that dog back later, and the ability to go back to that relationship, apologize, resolve it, and that's kind of a widespread thing on the team and culture, that we're okay stepping over the line. That's going to happen. We're humans, especially when we're trying to achieve big goals and we care about this. What matters more is that we can repair. And this is why I think the skill of knowing how to repair relationships is fundamental to a team that wants to achieve big goals. If you don't have the ability to repair with each other and have those skills and commitments, then once you start going into a hard place as a group, conflict starts to emerge, people step over the line, it's going to stay broken. And so when we talk about building a successful team, you all probably understand or have heard the kind of the process of forming, storming, norming, performing. All right, so we form as a team and everything feels kind of, great. And then it starts to storming. This is where conflict starts to happen. But we also have to norm. We have to say, hey, conflict is going to be part of this mission, folks. How do we become resilient in the face of conflict? How do we handle that? How do we repair that? Okay, so high-performing cultures. We need safety, belonging, connection, and we need to be able to give each other direct, honest feedback and be able to engage in conflict with each other. I'm going to link to a couple episodes in the show notes about developing healthy conflict skills amongst a team, because that might be useful here. But the book goes on and just kind of talks about, giving that, uncomfortable truth-telling or high candor feedback. And they talk about, so kind of a few years back, a team of psychologists from Stanford, Yale, and Columbia had middle school students write an essay, after which teachers provided different kinds of feedback. Researchers discovered that one particular form of feedback boosted student effort and performance so immensely that they deemed it magical feedback. Students who received it chose to revise their papers far more often than students who did not, and their performance improved significantly. The feedback was not complicated. In fact, it consisted of one simple phrase, and the phrase is, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them. Coming back to this concept of psychological safety, folks. In some of our workshops, we talk about this, kind of like this. We talk about this idea that high-performing teams need both psychological safety and high standards, and again, those things can go hand in hand. Okay, so the high standards is exactly what they're saying here. I have extremely high expectations. Yeah, as leaders, whether formally or informally, our job is to raise the bar, to set the bar at excellence, if that's where we're trying to go. And to hold that bar and have some level of accountability for hitting that bar. And to make it clear, I have high expectations, and therefore you're going to get this high frequency feedback. But you know what? It's also safe to disagree. It's also safe to push back. It's also safe to argue and debate. And when we mix all of this with those belonging cues that we've talked about throughout this episode, it is a very potent cocktail of creating a high-performing culture and team. So again, the book kind of goes on and talks about, there's these 3 separate cues. One being, hey, you are part of this group. You belong here. The other is this group is special and we have high standards. So again, connection, you belong here, and we have high standards and high performance expectations. And thirdly, I believe you can reach those standards. Okay, so it says, these signals provide a clear message that lights up the unconscious brain. Here is a safe place to give effort. They also give us insight into the reason Popovich's methods are effective. So coming back to the coach of the Spurs, his communications consist of 3 types of belonging cues. One is personal up-close connection. It's body language, it's attention, it's behaviors that translates as I care about you. I care about you. I'm showing you care and respect. The second cue is performance feedback. It's relentless coaching and criticisms that translates as we have high standards here. Again, think about this. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's care and respect first. You belong here. I care about you. I respect you. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you in my behaviors. The way I listen to you, the way I receive feedback non-defensively, the way I ask about what you need, the way I try to remove barriers to your performance, whatever that might be. The way I'm willing to give you, some time off to deal with a family matter, whatever. It's care and respect. But I'm also going to have performance feedback for you. That's part of this. And the third cue is big picture perspective. Again, larger conversations about politics, history, and food that translates as life is bigger than basketball. So it's getting real with people and helping everybody understand that, yeah, we care about performance here and we have high standards and we're going to hold people accountable to that. But you're connected here, you belong here, and you know what? Let's just be real and human with each other and recognize there's things more important besides this work. I love that. All right, let's see here. I'll wind down. Oh, I got it. I got to just read this part. So this really sparked a thought for me. But all right, so they're talking about some high-performing teams research. I think they're looking at Google. Basically, they say, okay, so the most successful projects were those driven by sets of individuals who formed what the researcher called clusters of high communicators. All right, and so these groups had a knack for navigating complex problems with dazzling speed. So the researcher dug into the data to find out where the people in these clusters got their knack for solving these problems. Had they written for the same journals? Did they possess the same level of intelligence? Were they the same age? Had they attended the same undergraduate schools or achieved the same level of degrees? Did they possess the most experience or the best leadership skills? All these factors would seem to make sense, but the researcher could find none that played a meaningful role in cohesion, except one: the distance between their desks. Okay, I don't talk about this a ton, especially on this podcast, but I had a job previously in which I was kind of helping design collaborative spaces. Happened to be for Amazon. I didn't work for Amazon. I worked for a different company that Amazon contracted with. But basically what we were doing is we would go into workspaces, and we would talk with their team. And what we were trying to do is basically create what they're talking about here, creating opportunity for collisions. So we'd look at the location of desks. Was there a room in the middle of of the office space that people could jump into? Removing physical barriers between peoples and groups. Closing off passageways or doorways that kind of funneled people, to one area. Basically, we were looking for opportunities. I mean, we didn't have the words for it at the time, but we were looking for opportunities to create this type of collisions amongst the group. So this is just another kind of maybe somewhat tactical thing to think about, is that there's actually a lot of really interesting research out there that just the proximity people have to each other can greatly improve their collaboration, their sense of belonging with each other, and things like that. Okay, so they kind of talk more about this researcher's work, who they're calling Allen. They say, hey, we could see just through the frequency, without knowing where they sat, who was on each floor. We were really surprised at how rapidly it decayed when they moved to a different floor. It turns out that vertical separation is a very serious thing. If you're on a different floor in some organizations, you may as well be in a different country. So when Allen, again the researcher, plotted the frequency of interaction against distance, he ended up with a line that resembled a steep hill. It was nearly vertical at the top and flat at the bottom. It became known as the Allen curve. A key characteristic of the Allen curve is the sudden steepness that happens at the 8-meter mark. At distances of less than 8 meters, communication frequency rises off the charts. I think this is super interesting. This was super fascinating when I read this. And again, looking back at the job I had, I mean, that's kind of what we were trying to do without having the words for it at the time, is we had recognized through, the research and the data, that if there are people in an office space that needed to be highly collaborative, we were finding ways to remove physical barriers or, put their desks closer together, whatever that might be, their offices nearer to each other. So it says here, so in other words, proximity functions as a kind of connective drug. Get close, and our tendency to connect lights up. They go on to say, hey, one study found that workers who shared a location emailed one another 4 times as often as workers who did not. And as a result, they completed their projects 32% faster. Closeness helps create efficiencies of connection. And the footnote here, which I thought was interesting, is so this Allen curve, it's about proximity and communication, right? So the Allen curve echoes another famous social metric, the Dunbar number, which reflects the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom we can have a stable social relationship, which is around 150 people. They would seem to underline the same truth. Our social brains are built to focus and respond to a relatively small number of people located within a finite distance of us. 150 feet also happens to be the rough distance at which we can no longer recognize a face with the naked eye. Folks, all this is doing is reminding me that we may be driving cars and flying in planes and developed artificial intelligence as human beings, but we're still running the same software that we did a million years ago. And we have to recognize who we are as social beings in order to create that level of connection, belonging, and psychological safety that's going to build a high-performing culture that gets stuff done. All right. Lastly here, I'm going to leave you with some of this section's ideas for action. So some more tactical, practical stuff for you to take away here. And I'm just going to share a few of the key pieces that I personally took away. Okay, and there's so many parts of this section, ideas for action in the book, that just reminded me of things that we've covered, we've talked about on this podcast, and so I will mention those, and then we'll link to episodes in the show note for you to keep learning, keep deep diving here. Okay, so I just want to read this opening paragraph to this section. I think it's a good, powerful summary. So, building safety isn't the kind of skill you can learn in a robotic, paint-by-the-numbers sort of way. It's a fluid, improvisational skill, sort of like learning to pass a soccer ball to a teammate during a game. It requires you to recognize patterns, react quickly, and deliver the right signals at the right time. And like any skill, yes, a skill, it comes with a learning curve. And I just want to remind everybody, like this is what we do in our work at Nash Consulting, is we say, hey, sure, there's some theory we might need to understand so we can wrap our head around why this stuff is important. There's some research we should look at to make sure we understand the implications of this and what we've discovered. But all this stuff that we're doing, it is a skill. And we have to take a skill and recognize that there is that learning curve. And we have to start the process now of developing habits. Practice, practice, practice. And I mean, I think that's just something that I think we all kind of intuitively get, but when we get caught up in the busyness of our work lives and, the busyness of business, we kind of forget that we have to keep honing and practicing some of these extremely important skills to our success. Like we go through a workshop and we learn some great skills about how to listen to each other, how to receive feedback non-defensively, how to give feedback clearly, that still keeps you connected relationally. And we do that once, and then we do a follow-up practice session, and then we get busy and we stop practicing the stuff, and then we wonder a year later why nothing has changed. You have to keep honing and practicing these skills. Okay, stepping off my soapbox now, let's get into some of these practical actions. All right, so things teams can start doing right away to build safety, a culture of safety, connection, belonging, and therefore high performance in their cultures. So over-communicate your listening. He says, okay, so when I visited the successful cultures, I kept seeing the same expression on the faces of listeners. It looked like this: head tilted, slightly forward, eyes unblinking, and eyebrows arched up. Their bodies were still, and they leaned toward the speaker with intent. The only sound they made was a steady stream of affirmations. Yes, gotcha. That encouraged the speaker to keep going and to give them more. All right, so we're talking about best practice listening skills. Despite how many eye rolls we might get initially, there's still a reason why in every single one, or almost every single one of our leadership and management and team development workshops, we work on best practice listening skills. We break that skill down into its component parts, and we practice and role play. Listening and showing up with best practice listening skills that indicate interest, care, and belonging is an extremely powerful factor for creating care, respect, and connection. And so I'll link to an episode in the show notes about some of those best practice listening skills that we train on. I mean, I'll be honest, I've taught the module on best practice listening skills hundreds of times probably at this point, and I still come back to it because I know it is a foundational, fundamental skill for building strong relationships. Okay, it also talks about in this section that interruptions shatter the smooth interactions at the core of belonging. So they are so discohesive, in fact, that the researcher uses interruption metrics in sales training tools. He says, when you can show someone numbers that the top salespeople hardly ever interrupt people and then rate them on that scale, you can deliver a powerful message. Of course, not all interruptions are negative. Creative sessions, for example, often contain bursts of interruptions. Remember that section at the beginning of this episode where I talked about the kindergartners competing in that challenge? They were in a creative process and there was bursts of energies, there were interruptions with each other. So not all interruptions are bad, right? The key is to draw a distinction between interruptions born of mutual excitement and those rooted in lack of awareness and connection. This last part to me is super key. Even when we talk about best practice listening skills, I mean, we talk about, hey, don't interrupt. And that's a general good best practice. But we live in shades of gray. And we got to recognize that, say someone's listening to us and they interrupt. They're like, whoa, that's cool. Can I? And they start asking a question. Rather than take that as a slight or disrespect, we might step back and say, oh, they seem really interested and engaged with what I'm saying here. So I think this part's important, right? So it's kind of excitement interruptions versus lack of awareness and connection, right? So is the interruption like, hey, I actually have something I want to say that's more important than you? Is that how it's kind of being expressed? Or is it about they're engaged with you? So I think that's cool. Okay, another practical takeaway here, and we talk about this when we talk about building psychological safety, especially as a leader. So the takeaway here is spotlight your fallibility early on, especially if you're a leader. So in any interaction, we have a natural tendency to try to hide our weaknesses and appear competent. It's a safety mechanism, folks. And if you want to create safety, this is exactly the wrong move. Instead, you should open up, show you make mistakes, and invite people with simple phrases like, this is just my 2 cents, or of course I could be wrong here, or what am I missing, or what do you think? I mean, just look at, if this is something you want to work on as a leader, I encourage you to just write down some of these phrases and keep them somewhere that you would see often, right? If it's not your already natural tendency to kind of lead or frame your thoughts with this kind of room for fallibility, write these phrases down and look at them daily. And I can almost promise you, you'll start implementing them into your conversations. So saying, hey, here's what I think, folks. But look, I could be wrong. What do you all think here? Or, hey, you know what? Rather than, okay, here's what we should do, especially as a leader with a power differential, that could basically close down helpful discussion and debate. But instead, hey, folks, here's my 2 cents. I think we should do this. You're saying, this is just my 2 cents. And then to follow that up, what do you all think about that? I might be wrong. You're encouraging people to poke holes in your ideas. And when you do that as a leader or as an influential person in the group, people will start to mirror that. And that's what we want here. There is this false notion out there that if you're a leader, you have to appear strong and confident. And then we think that strong confidence means we're not really leaving room for our own fallibility, or we're not showing up with a sense of humility. That's absolutely wrong. In fact, I think the most strong and confident leaders are the ones that are confident enough to step back, ask questions, show that they don't know anything, express where they are uncertain. That shows confidence in who you are. They talk about this a little bit. So there's this guy named R.C. Bufford, who's the general manager of the San Antonio Spurs, who we talked about earlier. And he's one of the most successful executives in the history of the sport, if you just look at how often that team was winning. But they say, hey, if you watch him operate, you might mistake him for an assistant. He's quiet, affable, who asks questions, listens keenly, and radiates humility. Early in our conversation, he brought up the looming retirements of several star players and said, I'm absolutely terrified of the future. This, folks, okay, this is me now. I'm not quoting anymore, but this is the power of vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness. Being over vulnerable in a way that makes it seem like everybody needs to take care of you can do some damage. But the vulnerability of like, I don't know. I'm worried about this. This is a little bit scary. I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. I'm not sure if this is the best decision. Right? That shows people that it's okay to be human. Okay, so back to this general manager. I mean, he could have talked about the organization's kind of vaunted player selection and development systems, or the progress of the young players, or the smart trades they've made, or the power, the culture they've built. But they quote here, but he didn't do that. He said he was terrified. This kind of signal is not just an admission of weakness. It's also an invitation to create a deeper connection, because it sparks a response to the listener. How can I help? To create safety, leaders need to actively invite input. This is what Amy Edmondson is saying, who we talked about earlier. It's really hard for people to raise their hand and say, hey, I have something tentative to say. And it's equally hard for people not to answer a genuine question from a leader who asks for their opinion or their help. Okay, so this next actionable takeaway here, it's what they're calling embrace the messenger. But I left a note for myself here that basically just says, hey, we have to create some safety in giving each other feedback. So here's what it says. One of the most vital moments for creating safety is when a group shares bad news or gives tough feedback. In these moments, it's important not simply to tolerate the difficult news, but to embrace it. You know the phrase, don't shoot the messenger, Edmondson says? In fact, it's not enough to not shoot them. You have to hug the messenger and let them know how much you need that feedback. That way, you can be sure that they feel safe enough to tell you the truth next time. All right, so especially as leaders with a power differential, but really for anybody on a team, one of the fundamental critical skills we all have to master and practice is how to receive feedback non-defensively, even when we feel defensive. Because guess what? We're human beings, and when we get critical feedback, we're likely going to feel defensive. And so we can't wait to not feel defensive to start showing up non-defensively. And so I'll link to the episode on the skill of receiving feedback non-defensively and what that looks like, what that sounds like. But again, I just got to reiterate this, especially as a leader, and say you're a kind of a new leader or with a new group, you got to look out for those opportunities when someone brings up bad news or gives you tough feedback. And when you spot that opportunity, you got to recognize that this is my chance to create safety and connection. How am I going to respond to this? This is a pivotal moment. And to respond to that with thanks, with gratitude, with this is exactly the type of things we need to be talking about. I am so thankful that you brought this up. Please keep bringing these things up. And responding to that well, right? Even when you disagree with the feedback, got to get that one down. All right, next piece here. I love this one, but overdue thank yous. I'll just read what it says because they're going to say it better than I can. But when you enter highly successful cultures, the number of thank yous you hear seems slightly over the top. At the end of each basketball season, for example, Spurs coach Greg Popovich takes each of his star players aside and thanks them for allowing him to coach them. Those are his exact words. Thank you for allowing me to coach you. This kind of moment happens all the time in highly successful groups because it has less to do with thanks than affirming the relationship. Coming back to something we talked about earlier here, everybody. We talked about, we can be kind and polite with each other and still having a culture of high expectations and high accountability. But I think it's well worth looking at ourselves first as leaders and saying, am I showing thanks and gratitude? We did an episode, we also did a blog post on showing appreciation, and actually it is a skill, and there's better ways to give thanks and appreciation that actually motivates people more than just a canned like, hey, good job. And I think that's worth listening to or reading that blog post. But at the end of the day, I would also encourage you not to overthink it. Like, create a culture where people give lots of thank yous. Thank you for bringing that feedback for me. Hey, team, thank you for being here today at this meeting. Look, even if it's part of the expectations that they have to be here at the meeting, thank them. It doesn't hurt. In fact, it helps a whole heck of a lot. And if, I've been here before as a leader, some of you might have been here before at the leader, where you feel like it's kind of a thankless job. What I found with myself and what I've found with other leaders I've coached is that if I think it's a thankless job and I'm not getting enough thanks and appreciation, it very well might be that I'm not demonstrating that first myself. And here's the cool part about creating a culture of thanks and, that culture starting with you as the leader. It is infectious. Okay, so here's what it says. So in one study by Adam Grant and Francesco Gino, subjects were asked to help a fictitious student named Eric write a cover letter for a job application. After helping him, half of the participants received a thank you response from Eric. Half received a neutral response. The subjects then received a request for help from a different person, Steve. Those who had received thanks from Eric chose to help Steve more than twice as often as those who received the neutral response. In other words, a small thank you caused people to behave far more generously to a completely different person. This is because thank yous aren't only expressions of gratitude, they're crucial belonging cues that generate a contagious sense of safety, connection, and motivation. Folks, a culture of thank you. Creates belonging, as they said. It's what's going to create the conditions for people to want to help each other out, to get each other's back. It's such a simple thing in concept, but so powerful. Okay, I'm going to give you just a few more pieces here, a few of my favorite pieces here. I'll be quick, but the other one is make sure everyone has a voice. So ensuring that everyone has a voice is easy to talk about, but hard to accomplish. This is why many successful groups use simple mechanisms that encourage, spotlight, and value full group contributions. For example, many groups follow the rule that no meeting can end without everyone sharing something. I kind of like that. Others hold regular reviews of recent work in which everybody can offer their 2 cents. Others establish regular forums where anyone can bring an issue or question before the group's leaders, no matter how controversial it might be. But no matter how strong the rule, the underlying key is to have leaders who seek out connection and make sure voices are heard. Big true. Big true. All right, so I loved this one because I talk about this all the time, but it says avoid giving sandwich feedback. All right, folks, you all know the feedback sandwich where I first give you the positive, and then I give you the critical feedback, and then I end it with something positive. I really dislike that way of giving feedback, and I think that's what the author is getting at here. For one, it seems disingenuous. It feels like the positive stuff was just there to kind of stage the negative feedback. It doesn't work when I've seen it be done. And so basically it says that, hey, in many organizations, leaders tend to deliver feedback using the traditional sandwich method. And this makes sense in theory, but in practice, it often leads to confusion as people tend to focus either entirely on the positive or entirely on the negative. He says in the cultures that he visited, he didn't see much of these feedback sandwiches. Instead, they would separate the two into different processes. They handled negative feedback through dialogue, first by asking if a person wants feedback. Folks, that's respect. Then having a learning-focused two-way conversation about the needed growth. Then they handled the positives through ultra-clear bursts of recognition and praise. All right. Lastly, here I'll just say that this might be one of my favorite pieces from this entire takeaway section, which is embrace fun. Embrace fun. This obvious one is still worth mentioning because laughter is not just laughter. It's the most fundamental sign of safety and connection. All right, everybody, I just got through one of the 3 skills in the book. That was about building safety, or AKA building psychological safety or connection. Hey, if you enjoyed this, let me know. Give me a ping, leave a comment. Maybe I'll do more of these, or maybe if you want me to cover skill number 2 or skill number 3 from this book in a later episode, let me know that. But I hope you got something out of this today, because I sure have gotten a lot of knowledge and practical skills from this book. Again, it's The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. Thanks all. Hey folks, wait. Don't go yet. Please, stay with me for 1 second here. I want to let you know about a couple cool little goodies that we have available for you. If you dig this podcast, you will probably also dig our Managing with Mind and Heart newsletter. This is a monthly newsletter where we share articles that we write about, hey, how to thrive as a manager, how to lead teams that are characterized by high morale, engagement, psychological safety, care and respect, collaboration, and high performance. You can sign up for this newsletter by texting the word leading to the number 66866. Additionally, you can go to our website and sign up for the newsletter there. Our website is www.nashconsulting.com. And of course, if you're not already aware, we have our cornerstone program for leaders and managers, and it is called Managing with Mind and Heart. Go figure. This program is something that we often bring into organizations to work with all their leaders on helping them get aligned and singing off the same sheet of music with best practice management skills and behaviors. We've brought this to hundreds of organizations at this point with really good results. And if you are not able or inclined to bring our program in-house, twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, we offer this 6-day Managing with Mind and Heart leadership development program online for anybody that would like to sign up and join us. To learn more about this online course and to register, you can go to our website. Once again, that's nashconsulting.com. Or send us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com. All right, that's all. That's it. See you later. Bye.